That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G is specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441. Hello and welcome to That's Debatable, the weekly news podcast of the Free Speech Union. Welcome back to all of our listeners, welcome back to all of our viewers, and welcome to any new listeners or to any new viewers. Ben, I think it's fair to say that in the week you decided to go away, the free speech world has gone totally crazy in terms of the news items, in terms of what we've seen the government doing, in terms of also the number of new members that we have had. And I think while you were away, you said to me, Ben, that almost every single day of your holiday, you had a request, a media request, and that you wouldn't have actually been able to take any time off. You'd have been on TV or radio for the full week, and probably a bit more as well.
Every day apart from Saturday. So I went to the New Forest with family and thought naively that the week of the 12th of August, middle of silly season, summer holidays, etc., would be quiet, which was misjudged. It's been absolutely extraordinarily busy. There is a lot of panic, I think it's fair to say. You can see this in the conversations people are having online, conversations that people are having in the pub, and in the correspondence that we're getting at the Free Speech Union. We have had there's been nothing like it in our experience, Tom. I think it's fair to say there's been an absolute deluge of people seeking our assistance or trying to alert us to things that are going on, to the prosecutions and the pleas being entered following the riots, things people have said online, the disproportionate nature of the punishment that seems to be being handed down. So there is a real sense of anxiety that we share, because I think we have been fighting in the last 6 weeks a multi-front political war. And every week the government is opening a new front. So I was on GB News just this morning, 25 minutes ago, talking about the proposal from the Home Secretary to make misogyny fall within the remit of the Prevent programme, despite the fact that this country has an endemic problem with Islamist extremism. And before that, we've had the Higher Education Act. We've got the new definition of Islamophobia on its way that would be a de facto blasphemy law. There's so much going on.
Yeah, and I diligently, as the data person at the Free Speech Union, was doing my numbers at the beginning of the month. Then end of July, obviously, we try and check on our numbers, do a bit of a deep dive, work out who's joined, what kind of people are joining, whether they're joining as annual members, monthly members, gold members, silver members, etc. And I think since that time I did that, which remember just 3 weeks ago, we have had 3,200, more than 3,250 new joiners join up. So we've grown by nearly a quarter in 3 weeks, more than we've ever done. I mean, we always talk in terms of PayPals for the Free Speech Union. The last big event for us was PayPal, when we were switched off essentially by PayPal. The Free Speech Union, we lost access to the services of PayPal, so our members couldn't pay their fees by using PayPal. Toby did the rounds of the media, and we got it switched back on. But obviously, people were aghast at that, and we had a huge event. More than 1,000 members sign up. But now, as you can see, we're 3 times a PayPal in terms of what's happened in just 3 weeks, and obviously, a lot of that relates to speech online in the fallout from the riots. So when we'll come on to talk about that and what that means for the country. But, that's the number of members we've had. The side that we often forget to talk about, but we're extraordinarily grateful for as well, is the donors. We've had a huge number of people signing up. I was looking at it over the weekend. and we had sort of 10 new donors just on Saturday afternoon, and we had 20 new donors on Friday. And again, really interesting to read the comments that donors are putting onto their donation. Things like, very encouraging for us. We read every single one, but also that sense of panic, that sense of fear, that sense of loss. Actually, I really get that. When I read the comments coming in from the donors, a sense of loss is, how did we get here? What's happened to the country? What's happened to freedom of expression? And then lastly, Ben, and you would, I expect, attest to this, although you're just hitting your desk this morning via a TV appearance. The last thing I would say is the number of cases that we're getting, and a lot of those are not necessarily immediate free speech cases. They're more queries, concerns, again, notifications that are coming into the system where people are saying, what are we going to do about this person or this arrest or this or that, and can I help? And a lot of people sort of just wanting to let us know let us know their concerns. And so, I thought it would be worth just briefly sort of saying, when people come for help, Ben, and you'll be best placed to answer this, what's the best way to, if you come to us for help, to prepare documents or thoughts or whatever it may be before someone comes to us? Of course, come to us immediately. There's no reason not to. But just to make things quicker, more expedient, is there a best way to kind of come to us, as it were, Ben?
Contact us as early as possible. Then we will be able to intervene in a timely way. There's a form on our website. You fill it in. It asks you for a brief summary of what's going on. It asks for who you are in a dispute with, be that your employer or the NHS or a council or a police force or whatever. It's very straightforward. You can put quite a lot of detail in there. You can put a very brief summary if you'd prefer to do that. And then one of our case team will review that on the day in which it is sent in. We do have, as we've described, a deluge of requests for help, and people contacting us, alerting us to things that have been going on and pointing us to people who they think would benefit from our help. So we are working through that and making sure that we triage and deal with the most urgent things in a timely way. One thing I wanted to say, Tom, was, what was the line that David Starkey used? Was it that the Free Speech Union is the only thing standing between us and prison? Is that right? It was something like that.
That's right. He says everybody should join the Free Speech Union. It may be the only organization standing between you and between most of us and jail.
Yeah. So I think what I'd say is that there are a few different categories of members that we attract. Some people come to us and they say, I'm in the middle of this situation, or this situation just started at work or wherever, and I really need your assistance. Please, can you help me right now? Then we have a group of people who think that they might be in a situation like that at some point in the future, and they join the FSU for peace of mind. Then we have a category of people into whom I'd say most of our retired membership fall, who are horrified about what is going on in the country and basically want to assist us and our members and our political work. And I think our membership has built a gigantic flood defense, and every new person who bungs in a tenner as a donor, every new person who signed up as a member is carrying another sandbag to that flood defense. And behind that, we are desperately trying to preserve the last embers of freedom of speech in the United Kingdom. And the government is sending wave after wave after wave to try and extinguish it. It feels to us.
I certainly think that's right. I mean, it's been quite touching, actually, to see the comments that are coming on the donor side, where people have said, I'm a pensioner, I only have the state pension, this is all I can give, I can't afford to join. And we're immensely grateful for those sorts of gifts. They mean a huge amount. And I share those comments, and you will attest to this, Ben, I share those comments with other members of the team. Toby's included in that. And everyone else who works at the Free Speech Union, obviously anonymized. We don't share any personal information, willy-nilly at all. but we do share the sort of anonymized comments, and some of them are very, very touching, and they do make a difference. The £5 they add up, the £10 they add up, and the only thing I was going to add, Ben, about when people come to us, something I always notice is that when we're looking at the specifics of a situation that someone is in, a freedom of expression situation that they're in, the answer is always it depends. It's very dependent on the specific situation that they're in. So putting together a timeline, having screenshots or the exact thing that was said ready, not necessarily on first contact. If you don't feel comfortable sharing that, you're sort of sending this into the ether onto a form. You might not be comfortable sharing that at first blush, but once you're in contact with one of Ben's team, having that makes it immensely faster, simpler, more expedient, doesn't it? So these are the screenshots. This is what was said. This is the timeline. This is when it was said, by whom, what, where, when, how, why. Great. Yes. We're off to the races. We can go straight into bat at that point. So I think I've mixed
Keep records.
Keep records of things. I know.
Take screenshots and take contemporary notes of phone calls or conversations. If you feel like things are heating up in your workplace or wherever, and you think you are going to be contacting us at some point, or you think there's a reasonable possibility of it happening, or even an outside chance of it happening, I would strongly encourage you to be taking private notes. I would not encourage you to secretly record conversations or meetings. I would say, in fact, not to do that. But I would keep written records that are closely contemporary to conversations, meetings, altercations, that sort of thing. Very important to do that.
Yeah. And with 3,250 plus new members, we are expecting and have already started to see that surge in just notifications or queries or concerns. So, and another thing we should talk about, which I think will segue into our next or first main item, is the sort of what we call the FAQ, the frequently asked questions that we often put people in touch with. When people get in touch with us, we often point them back to the FAQ because they're very well written. They've been written carefully over a period of time with the input of our lawyers and our researchers into very specific issues to do with free speech. And the most recent FAQ that we've written is on the various online restrictions to free speech. In particular, what can you say online, what can you not say online? And we wrote this in the immediate aftermath of the riots and also the arrests that were starting to happen for what people were posting on Facebook and what people were posting on Twitter. And I think what struck us was we've talked about for a long time the risk of what we say online and the risks that's run when you say things online, because we've kind of been aware of how these various acts, and we can go through them in a minute, affect what we can and can't say. But I was really struck by, I don't think citizens generally are aware of the restrictions that are already in place on freedom of expression. And we spoke about online censorship. But I mean, the three main acts that FAQ goes through is the Public Order Act, 1986, the Communications Act, 2003, and the most recent, which is the Online Safety Act, 2023. And as ever, the issue is over time, and this has been raised by various commentators, the issue over time is definitions in those acts. So they cover things like stirring up hatred, they cover things like grossly offensive, they cover things like abusive, and now in the Online Safety Act, they cover things like deliberately false in a way that can cause non-trivial psychological harm. And the problem is these definitions are slippery and they are prone to interpretation, and that interpretation gets looser and looser and looser as the culture tends towards less and less free speech. So I wondered if we could start there, Ben, in terms of what is the state of free speech in the UK? How do you see it, Ben?
Lord Frost, wrote a brilliant article on the 15th of August in the Telegraph about some of these the house of horrors of free speech that already exists in law already, and the headline of that was that we can no longer say that Britain is a free country. I was talking about some of this stuff with Tom Harwood back in April or May. It was just after the Scottish Hate Crime Act had come into effect, and
On
viewers
GB
will
News.
remember on GB News there was this bungled launch of it. Ministers were unclear whether or not J.K. Rowling should be prosecuted under it, and if she wouldn't, why would anyone else be for making similar comments and so on. It was a complete disaster, as had been warned when it was.
This was the Hate Speech Act in Scotland.
Correct, when it was going through. But one of the questions that Tom Harwood asked me was, well, obviously there's this panic about what's going on in Scotland, understandable. But the situation in the rest of the United Kingdom is not actually that great. And I think that's a completely fair point, as indeed Lord Frost has put it in the Telegraph. So we have the Public Order Act, which goes on into stirring up hatred on grounds of race, religious belief, or sexual orientation. The Communications Act, which makes it a crime to cause annoyance, inconvenience, or needless anxiety to another. The Malicious Communications Act, as you said, Tom, the Online Safety Act, which we have yet to see the effect of. And this is something that there's no two ways to put it. We anticipate that causing a significant number of prosecutions. We've seen a taste of this already with the aftermath of the riots. And I think it introduces language, particularly around false information, that is hugely, perhaps entirely subjective. And I think people have demonstrated already that in the aftermath of the riots, there are instances where some people are being prosecuted for saying things which have turned out not to be incorrect, and others have not been. And so we see, once again, this two-tier approach. And with something as subjective as disinformation, misinformation, false information, etc., we're only going to see more of that.
I thought that Lord Frost drew, in his normal astute way, three very interesting points towards the end of that article, a couple of which you've already touched on. The first being that those acts, these Communications Act or Public Order Act, they were designed for a different world. Obviously, the Online Safety Act is an exception there. But they are really too broad to deal with social media, which is open to all, which comes in its own particular style. And critically, where one person's, this is exact quote from Lord Frost's article, he says that where one person's sharp comment is another's abuse. That is the way of things in the social media. You don't know who you're interacting with. You don't know how they're going to take it, obviously. And the problem is that it's in the eye of the ears rather than the mouth. So it's how it's heard rather than how it's said a lot of the time that is the determinant in how these laws are interpreted.
And also, and Tom, you are not on X, formerly known as Twitter. It's also, of course, how people deliberately misconstrue what you have said for malicious and malevolent reasons. And we see that both with people being reported to the police and also with people being reported to their employer. And this, of course, is gone.
I see that on the small amount of social media I'm on, is if any joke, any satire, anything that's obviously making a light-hearted point, you go into the comments and there will always be someone who says, not funny. This is, this is mocking such and such a person, or this is cruelty to animals. And you just end up looking at these guys saying, are you for real? And then people engage with them, and then they engage with them, and they feed the trolls. And you think, this is madness. Yet you do not know who you're engaging with. And as you say, they can quickly take offense and take some kind of action against you.
If you are concerned, do take a look at the FAQs document on online speech. When it was being drafted, we were in the room together, Tom, was it a fortnight ago almost? And we were watching almost live as the Director of Public Prosecutions gave this incredibly garbled, mangled statement, which seemed to suggest, or could plausibly seem to suggest, that merely sharing footage of riots could in fact be a criminal offence. And we have addressed that point in the FAQ. So as I said, I would strongly encourage people to go and look at that. And later today, I'll be referring a lot of people who've written to us asking about, I said this 3 years ago. Am I now going to be prosecuted for it? I will be referring people on to the guide that we have published. There's all this legal stuff, but there's just one other thing, Tom, I just wanted to mention, which we spoke about before we started recording, which is that beneath the legal layer, the hard censorship, the hard restrictions on freedom of speech that people are now coming up against, there's also, of course, still all the same culture war, soft censorship that we have been contending with, particularly since 2020, but I would argue since about 2016. And just as one example of this, as I said to you, Tom, last night, I wanted to find an episode of Fawlty Towers to watch. My wife has not seen it, and I thought we'd watch an episode. It was impossible to find anywhere.
I'm offended that you someone so close to you has not even seen Fawlty Towers.
I was trying to rectify this. I couldn't find it anywhere. Not on BBC, not on BritBox, not on Amazon. It is impossible to watch it online. So I will dig out a DVD box set that I bought 20 years ago from the garage. But nonetheless, because of the furore that surrounded one particular episode in 2020, the whole thing has been canned. And strange coincidence, we were talking in the pub a couple of weeks ago, Tom, weren't we, about an episode of Mad Men in which one of the characters, Roger Sterling, wears blackface. And we were talking about the fact that it was completely bizarre that in a program that is obviously incredibly sexist and depicting a very particular set of people in the 1960s, there's no real warning or disclaimer about that. But this particular episode, there are trigger warnings and alerts and all the rest of it before we were allowed to watch it. And we were talking about the bizarre hierarchy of intersectionality in which one of those offences against an identity group is much more serious than the other for reasons that no one's ever really been able to articulate. And I saw the very next day that episode had actually been removed from streaming services.
Well, it's very interesting because in 2020, then Fawlty Towers, they were taking that single episode out. But what you're now saying is they've taken the whole thing down. Again, it's that mission creep of censorship. And of course, one of the things I really find interesting is the connection between everything. We spend most of our time talking about EDI and DEI. Now we're seeing people being arrested for online offences. Now there's a variety of those, and we can't know for sure. Where without looking at the specifics, we can't know for sure where each one of those takes you and how it's best to analyze it against the new law. But it's all related because the culture is derived by this new identity politics and absolutely starts to affect, if not the law and the front line of the law, although it has through the Online Safety Act and others, then the interpretation of the law, the step before that, is driven by the culture, and the culture is driven by this identity politics, which is, of course, the last point that Lord David Frost makes. We've developed a culture of avoiding offence, and out of that culture, a culture of avoiding offence, by definition, is a culture opposed to free speech. Yes. And I have heard, I think I quoted on the radio last week, Ben, Idi Amin, which is not a person. He's not a person I tend to quote that regularly, but Idi Amin said, there is freedom of speech, but I cannot guarantee freedom after speech. And so, that I listen to commentators on the news, particularly politicians from the government, and they're not saying that directly, but there's always this statement, there's freedom of speech, but. And it's just a version of that, isn't it? It's just a version of that. And that's why it's all connected. Identity politics, the culture, the law, they're all very closely connected. So, that's just, we're in the very shallow pools of the state of the free speech in the United Kingdom, I think, Ben. And but this is the underlying thread of everything that we deal with every day and that we are wrestling with, I think, as a nation at the moment. But we should move on to our next item. Which is hate speech hypocrisy. It's all about hate speech, isn't it, Ben?
Well, you've been doing some offence archaeology, Tom. ironically.
Yeah, well, not me, but this was in the Telegraph. So Michael Deacon was writing in the Telegraph last week, and he was obviously listening to and noting the number of people who are getting in trouble for online comments that they were making on social media. And he did do. He went back. I don't think he had to. I don't think you have to go too far. He did some offence archaeology on some of the Labour MPs and came up with things that were tweeted 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that were pretty horrible. And actually, you'd think, well, if you're going to apply the same rule that you're applying today to people online, to the MPs who are sat today in Parliament, wouldn't they get their collar felt? Was the natural question that it raised. I mean, a couple of examples. In 2009, and this was before he became a Labour MP, Wes Streeting responded to a controversial column in the Daily Mail by tweeting of the woman who wrote it. And I'm not even going to say the whole thing he said, Ben, because it was pretty horrible. There would be nothing natural about this lady's demise if I shoved the star and star bag under a train, which was pretty horrible thing to say. Now, he has since apologized, obviously retracted that and said it was in bad taste. But two things struck me. First of all, that tweet is certainly would be treated, I think, a little differently in this environment. So things have changed a lot, and they've changed very, very quickly. But the second thing, and the main thing, is the hypocrisy. You know, that kind of comment about imagining someone else coming to a sticky end, that kind of comment is the sort of thing that's getting people into real trouble today. And you know, there's another example. I mean, some of these I don't even want to quote, because although they were 15 years ago, I worry
because you're a snowflake, Tom.
I'm a complete snowflake, Ben.
Yeah. So someone else, another Labour MP, said effing Estonian retard in a historic post, and so on. So there's lots of this stuff. I mean, obviously, I hope it goes without saying that the view of the Free Speech Union, and our view personally, is that people should be allowed to say stupid things, particularly when they're young. And I say this particularly with reference, by the way, to myself and what my friends were saying at university. Absolutely outrageous stuff all the time in 2009 when we were all 18. We've gone from a culture in which people would, particularly young people, would deliberately say really edgy things, outrageous things, because it's called having a sense of humour. You say things you don't believe for comic effect, i.e. a joke. So in the old days, people used to joke. Nowadays, everything you say is, of course, recorded for posterity forever. It's screenshotted. And if you say something unwise on social media in 2009, you might well have forgotten about it by 2024. And then you get people combing through everything you've ever said. Now, it's one thing when that happens to politicians. I think it's unreasonable that it happens to politicians, actually. I don't think it's fair that Wes Streeting is held responsible for something he said in 2009 that was clearly a joke. There's no world in which he was actually going to go and push somebody under a train. Incidentally, I bumped into him on a train last year.
You did.
I did, yeah. He was in a rush to get to a statement after PMQs. And the train was running quite late, and we were stood in a very, very overcrowded train between carriages. And I was first to the door, and he said, would you mind? He was very polite, actually. He said, would you mind terribly if I went first? And I said, that's fine, but it is the only favour I'm ever going to do for the Labour Party. And we did agree not to tell anyone. But especially now. So I regret not alighting from the train at a very stately pace now with all of my suitcases and so on. But anyway, it's not reasonable, clearly, that he is held to account for a poor taste joke made decades ago. I don't think anyone with any sense of humour would survive that level of scrutiny. Obviously, our core mission is making sure that people are not in the situation where their lives are ruined for this sort of thing. But this is what happens if you start playing by these rules. I think everybody's going to have something in their skeletons in their closet, aren't they?
Well, and the trouble is that the in what direction is the playing field tilted? It's always tilted towards the progressive ideology. So if you adhere to the progressive ideology, and this is where the EDI thing comes in, and the identity politics, if that's what you adhere to, and in that context, you're making your joke, you're going to be okay. But if you flip it around and it's always tilted against people the conservative view, the views on the right, then you're going to be the ones that get your collar felt. That is just the way this is playing out in this particular incarnation of restricted free speech. And that asymmetry is the theme of the last 3 weeks, the last 6 weeks. Asymmetry, two-tier, one rule for one, another rule for another is a theme that we're absolutely seeing come out of all of this.
This is actually one point. I'm glad to have the opportunity to make this point now, because you know what it's like on a TV interview. You just don't get a chance to say everything that you wanted to. One of the points I was going to make about the misogyny proposal or the review that's going on, obviously we don't have any real detail about it yet, was that I can easily envisage a situation in which schoolboys from different backgrounds are going to be treated very, very differently in terms of prevent referrals for misogyny. I can easily envisage a situation in which some communities are treated differently because they have cultural and religious views about women which are different to the mainstream, and that again would become an example of two-tier Britain. I think that's entirely likely to happen. So thank you for mentioning that, Tom, because I did want to get that point in earlier.
No, I think the problem is, Ben, that when I was thinking about how we line up items for today, we've not had an episode for 2 weeks. There has been so much coming together, all the things we have talked together about for over a year now, and taken instances of members who've been harmed and affected, their lives being torn to pieces because they lost their job. We've talked about all the sort of some of the two-tier policing is not new, and certainly the two-tier training of the police with regards EDI versus freedom of expression, all sorts of issues. They really come together in a rather calamitous way in the last fortnight or so.
Perfect storm.
It's an absolutely perfect storm. And you just don't really know, well, where do I start to address the issues and what are the underlying issues? And I think listening to the luminaries of our cultural age is always very helpful. I've been listening to some of what David Starkey's saying about our times, and he's always well worth listening to. But yeah, it's really hard to pick through all of this and say, well, how do we actually line up an episode for our members and for our new members that addresses all of these things appropriately? There's too much to talk about, Ben. And yet there's also too little to talk about, because once you boil it down and say, well, it's all rooted in identitarian politics that's gone too far, and it's kind of a version of Mao's China that we're seeing, you say, well, okay, that's it. Great. Episode over.
Well, on that note, I better get back to it. We have a lot of inquiries and requests for help. So,
Indeed.
Tom, it's been a pleasure talking to you, albeit with some heavy subject matter. I hope particularly that new listeners and viewers have found this to be an interesting insight into our work and what we are doing every single day, including when we're on holiday, to try and preserve freedom of speech in this country.
And we're going to try and keep that 75% win rate up.
Yes, we are.
Even though cards are stacked against us, we win 75% of the cases where we know the outcome, and we're going to try and keep that number high. Absolutely working 24/7 for that.
Well said. Well, I think goodbye for now.
Goodbye to everyone.